So, this afternoon, dear friend and colleague Joe Farkas will be addressing us. Joe has been a humanist chaplain and celebrant for over a decade, completing his Master of Divinity through a humanistic Buddhist university. Over that same time, he served in the Army National Guard as a combat medic. Today, he is a certified ethical culture leader in training in the Chicago area. When Joe isn't furthering his professional work, he enjoys exercise and spending time with his wife and their dog. So, Joe, I want to also thank you. When we mentioned that you were a medic, one of the workshops that you did for us at the assembly in Philadelphia was to share some of your skills with us as a medic. So I wanted to appreciate you again for doing that. And I'm so looking forward to hearing you. We would love to have had you here in person, but getting out of and back to Chicago would have been impossible. So thank you for joining us on Zoom, Joe.
You're very welcome. Yeah, amazingly, my flight left on, at least according to Delta, my flight left on time yesterday. But that is, who can say whether my return flight will leave on time? So can everyone hear me clearly? Perfect. So I'd like to start with a short story, maybe a little apocryphal. In 1914, Ernest Shackleton, the Irish-British polar explorer, took 27 men aboard the ship Endurance to make the first attempted land crossing in Antarctica. The expedition ended in failure when the Endurance became trapped in ice and sank to the bottom of the Weddell Sea. But miraculously, Shackleton and his entire crew managed to survive. Prior to departing, he is said to have published one of the greatest advertisements in the history of print media while in London, seeking crew for the trip. You may have heard of it. It's read, "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness. Safe return, doubtful. Honor and recognition in the event of success." However, he received no less than 5,000 letters from men in London seeking to join the expedition, including this one. While we don't have a copy of his original advertisement, we do have a copy of this letter. Dated January 11th, 1914. Dear Sir Ernest, we three sporty girls have decided to write and beg of you to take us with you on your expedition to the South Pole. We are three strong, healthy girls and also gay and bright, willing to undergo any hardships that you yourselves undergo. If our feminine garb is inconvenient, we should just love to don masculine attire. We have been reading all books and articles that have been written on dangerous expeditions by brave men to the polar regions. We do not see why men should have all the glory and women none, especially when there are women just as brave and capable as there are of any men. Trusting you will think over our suggestion. Peggy Peregrine, Valerie Davy, and Betty Webster. P.S. We have not given any further particulars in case you should not have time to read this, but if you are at all interested, we will write and tell you more. Greatest wish. They were not numbered among the 27, but I wanted to include that we in history have not forgotten their attempt to be one of the 27, or at least three. So in today's presentation, I want to posit that humanism is almost a warrior religion, because we have two out of the three things in common that a warrior religion or warrior ethos, which are in direct opposition to traditional religious thought, which say that we don't share religion's problem of evil, we don't deny the reality of death, and we don't share other traditional religion's obsession with escaping all suffering forever. But we also don't share warrior religion's almost enthusiastic, masochistic enthusiasm for suffering. The origin of this talk is the work of a contemporary humanist philosopher, Martin Hagland, who put it clearly that the essential objective of traditional religions and traditional religious thought is to attain freedom from the pain of loss. And I'd add the pain entirely and loss entirely forever. Spinoza calls this the aspiration to eternity. Paul Tillich calls it the ultimate concern of religion. Our natural response to change in the world is feeling of loss, and that loss is experienced as suffering. But change is also constant and inescapable. So that pain of loss that Martin Hagland describes is not escapable for us as long as we're alive. Um, Dan Millman puts it in another contemporary philosopher puts it in different charms. He says, we can't always get what we want. We can't always avoid what we don't want. And even when we can do either of those, we can't do either forever. So, part of the quotes was that traditional religion tries to prescribe or claim to prescribe the right relationships to end our suffering forever, to never truly die, to enjoy an existence without pain, suffering, or death forever. That can either be through our own internal work, or as in Buddhism, it can be by intercession by a deity or someone or something outside of ourselves. Uh, it posits that we can do the right things to go to heaven or some other paradise after we die forever, where there is no pain or suffering. Um, the warrior ethos has a completely different response to the issues of suffering and death, which is that the warrior ethos asks people to move towards those things, not away from them. The warrior ethos doesn't seek a relationship, a system of relationships that allows us to escape suffering. It asks us to reconcile suffering. The warrior ethos include honor codes ranging from chivalry to Bushido and others, but formal codes with names attached to them are late formations. Most cultures have systems for evaluating honor and right conduct. The warrior ethos across the globe has each list can be different, but most have a pretty consistent body. Most value selflessness, courage, loyalty, self-control, generosity, a sense of honor and fair play, passion, resourcefulness, tenacity, a sense of justice, empathy, integrity, self-mastery, patience, respect, and a certain cheerfulness and zeal for facing adversity, sort of like Ernest Shackleton's advertisement and letter from the three girls. The warrior ethos offers that adapting to our suffering and embracing opportunities to suffer more instead of avoiding it lets us grow in our virtues instead of decay. If we master nothing else in life, we should be masters of our own suffering, our own life and death. You should take pride in your early wake up, a long, hard day, difficult work, meager rewards. You should be proud of how much you've sacrificed for your community. The warrior ethos encourages living the opposite of self-preservation. David Goggins puts it, you should do something that sucks every single day. Now, why? Why? What does that have to offer humanism when humanism and ethical culture were trying to make the world a better place with less suffering, not subject ourselves to misery for misery's sake? We only have one life. It's the problem of humanism. The promise of humanism isn't a right relationship that offers us an eternity of pleasure free of pain after a lifetime of trials and suffering. It's the promise that our lives become richer when we better appreciate them, that they're the only life we get. We'll never get the time back. It's incredibly precious to have. Why would we take this incredibly precious life, which we only get one of, and subject it intentionally to suffering? Well, in many ways, warrior virtues are civic virtues. To paraphrase one Greek historian, asked the Spartans, why do the Spartans punish the loss of helmet or spear with a fine, but the loss of their shield with death? To which the Spartans replied, because the helm protects the soldier, the spear kills the enemy, but the shield protects their neighbor. The soldier has lost that. The whole army cannot stand against the enemy. Warrior ethos asks a question about what we shall do with our power when we have the power to do anything that we want. In humanism, we have this wonderful space of, we have one life to live. What we do with it is all up to us. We can do whatever we want. There isn't a powerful being overseeing what we're doing, and there's no eternal punishment that waits for us if we decide not to do the right thing. The warrior ethos bound up this question of, if you could do anything, what will you do? Shall we be merciful to those who have tried to harm us? Shall we give when we have and when others have not? If we do so, why should we do it? And one answer is that without a belief in good faith relationships between people, society simply cannot exist. If you do not give to the group, if you do not stand with the group, there isn't a group. The warrior religion says you should, and because your gift to the group ensures the existence of the group, warrior religion says you should practice giving as much for your neighbor as you can, keeping as little as possible for yourself, and in the meantime, constantly develop your capacity to give more, to keep less. And according to that same warrior ethos, sustaining those efforts past the point of discomfort is ultimately essential to practicing any virtue. If you met someone who said that they were patient, except that they couldn't wait for what they wanted, would you assert that they were patient at all? If someone said that they were a compassionate person, just not for anybody other than themselves, could you ever say that they were compassionate? Maybe someone says that they're a sincere person, unless they benefit from lying. The answer is no. We couldn't say for certain whether those people were ever patient, compassionate, or sincere, because those virtues are only apparent when people have to sustain them past the point of discomfort. In fact, I personally would go so far as to say that those virtues do not even exist without the effort to the point of discomfort. I cannot be curious except of something I do not understand any more than I could be brave about something that doesn't frighten me. That means that whatever virtues you want to practice, including humanist and ethical ones, they share a single unifying trait, which is that they depend on our ability to sustain the effort of practicing them past the point of discomfort and to tolerate the suffering and discomfort that comes from upholding our virtues even when they're difficult. And there's great pedagogy behind that today in our schools that focuses on training students to sustain effort. More than anything else, temptations plaguing kids now today is an opportunity to stop sustaining effort and do something easier, whether that's quitting a hard chore or turning immediately to AI to write a paper. New pedagogy is drilling down on putting kids in positions where they have to apply themselves and they have to develop at least a tolerance for the discomfort that comes with sustained effort. It's required some old school tactics like not emailing, reading, or signing typed papers. Students receive paper copies they must read with their own two eyes, and then they have essays that they have to write by hand, not with the help of a computer. It's strenuous because increasing the invitation for short form media is to never have to focus or apply effort to anything past the point of discomfort. You can always switch from, as soon as something becomes uncomfortable, to switch to a new thing. When you don't train your brain to tolerate effort, you don't just fail to train it to excel at effort. You increase its intolerance to effort. Bodies and minds both work like this. An astronaut in space that doesn't have any gravity to press on their bones doesn't just fail to grow new bone, they lose the bone mass they already have. It's like information that you learn. If you don't apply that information, you forget it. You don't just fail to retain it. Use it or lose it. That's how our bodies work. And we can kind of see that as humanist atheists when people don't confront death. It's an uncomfortable thing to grieve throughout our entire lives. We see that when people can't tolerate the effort that comes with understanding and accepting death, grieving their own death, they can become irrational. They can accept belief systems that say there are relationships that we can have that can help us escape death forever. Like any creature trapped where it cannot escape intolerable circumstances, people become erratic, irrational, even dangerous. When we can't tolerate the discomfort or pain, we can't escape. It's important to challenge and develop that tolerance for suffering internally and intentionally. Because sometimes things become harder, stakes get higher without us trying. Sometimes we find ourselves a frog in a pot without any control over the dial. If you're not already conditioned to suffering, you could become that irrational, bitey animal when your life suddenly becomes more difficult than you expected it to be. And conditioning yourself to effort and to the discomfort of practicing your virtues prevents that drowning response. Now, humanists are good in that way. Because whatever other comfort we might seek, we're really clear that you shouldn't seek comfort in irrational things. Kind of put a boundary there. But it's not quite enough, and I'll get to that. So this is the reason why warriors embrace this sense of suffering as an inherently worthwhile activity, even if it doesn't grant eternal life or eliminate suffering for ourselves. Suffering intentionally within our own control, developing that tolerance for sustaining effort past the point of discomfort is an essential emotional skill for practicing any and all virtues. It remains a tough sell because, like I said, the fundamental ultimate objective of traditional religions is to escape that suffering forever. But warriors instead embrace suffering as a way of life, even if it inevitably ends in death. Now, the warrior ethos demands that warriors increase their challenges because as we acclimate to a stimulus, the stimulus takes more severe circumstances to trigger. As much as I love the warrior ethos, I love following it, I love studying it, it has shortfalls. I'm going to get into that. Not taken carefully, constantly trying to subject yourself to stressful circumstances at your very limits can lead to burnout. We see that even in special forces when at the top level of mental conditioning, at the top level of physical conditioning, the body gives out. The fried thyroids, their bodies are quitting out from under them because that constant extreme stress just degrades them. And I don't think it's unique to special forces soldiers. I think there are teachers who deal with this. I think there are ICU nurses who deal with this. I think there are clergy who deal with this. At a certain point, succeeding at a job where the suffering is truly intolerable, is truly beyond the limits of a person to sustain. It isn't about your cultivating a tolerance for the suffering. It's about your ability to sustain the effort and to recover from that stress. And what are the solutions being posed toward them? Whether the army or stressful workplaces like police stations, fire stations, schools, and hospitals, what solutions are they looking for? The solutions that are being proposed to these challenges include better stress management techniques, recovery process, better quality of life, better quality of sleep, meditation, good nutrition, play, life-giving intimate relationships, trustworthy community. Things which, funny enough, sound an awful lot like what we're promising in humanism. A life well lived and savored that is virtuous and fun, well considered and healthy, in the best possible way. This is the best way to live the only life we get to live. Which for me is why it's so compelling to ask why humanism doesn't have a relationship with suffering the way warrior ethos do. Is humanism simply neither a warrior religion nor a traditional religion? I think that's true today. And we don't have to become a warrior tradition, and we don't have to become a traditional religion either. What makes noise to me about what the warrior ethos has to teach humanism is that we're a value-based community which knows which values we treasure. But we don't talk about what it's like developing those virtues. That the experience of developing and sustaining our virtues feels like suffering. And we don't mention what and we don't have a named experience with suffering. This is sort of similar to the gulf between knowing the answer to a problem and performing the answer. Many of us know what kind of house we'd like to live in. How many of us could build it? Many of us could imagine, well, if I wanted to run a marathon, I would have to run so many miles a week for so many months until I was ready. But knowing the training plan and executing the training plan are two very different things. And executing that training plan requires a mental tolerance for effort beyond the point of discomfort. Now, another perspective might be that we can have virtue, we can be virtuous without practicing them to the past point of discomfort. Like I said, I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. And one thing that humanism shares with the warrior ethos is that we don't believe in the ghosts of good or evil. We don't believe that things can be inherently good if they don't do good things, that things are inherently evil, and that things aren't necessarily inherently evil, but if they do evil things, then we have nothing else to go on. Uh, you can't, for example, you can't be cruel and ethical culture and say, but deep down, ethical culture is not a cruel community. Um, we don't possess a superstition that virtue exists separately from conduct, any more than we suspect that there is a soul separate from the body. A society which does not function humanely cannot be called inherently humane, nor can one that does not function ethically be called inherently ethical. Uh, there's no ethical ghost. There's no humane ghost. There's no virtuous ghost that exists without the practice of the virtue, the practice of humanity, practice of ethical conduct. And that's one of the two of the three things that humanism has in common with warrior religion. That goodness, if it does exist, it must be cultivated and it has to be acted on. We assert that humanist and ethical culturalists is that people have worth, they have inherent dignity. People retain that dignity even if they do vices or bad things. That's a difference. And I get a difference between dignity as a virtue and dignity as a possession or a quality. We know that to have a society that benefits everyone, we have to uphold that inherent human dignity, even when people hurt others. Respecting that dignity doesn't mean letting them do whatever they want. Sometimes dignity means not imprisoning people intent on committing harm in inhumane conditions. As soon as the community starts creating excuses to treat people inhumanely, assert that dignity can be forfeited or must be earned in the first place, community starts a march towards a community which defines humanity according to its whims. Dignity can just be taken away. That's my biggest caveat for the warrior, is that if you accept that enduring effort is necessary for all virtues, and you believe that possessing dignity is a virtue, not an inherent quality of people, you may be susceptible to the suggestion that if you aren't enduring effort to the point of discomfort for the community, then you've forfeited your dignity. Or at least that your dignity in the community is directly proportional to your suffering and sacrifice for the community. And we see that in the warrior culture. We see that in warrior cultures. In the Army and the Marines, there's a slur for people who don't do infantry or real Marine work, POGs, personnel other than grunts. That these people aren't real sufferers. These people don't really give a lot. They don't really push hard. They don't suffer like the infantry does. And they're less than us because of it. The conflation that suffering equals personhood in the warrior ethos is an incredible motivator that inspires people to give 110%. A lot of coaches and leaders aren't opposed to using that mentality. People are right to consider the dangers of it, because when it backfires, it can be fatal. People become injured when people burn out, when they can no longer train, when they can no longer fight, when they can no longer play in the game. They have a tough decision to make. They either need to reassess how they understand their lives to be dignified and valuable, or they come to the conclusion that without the ability to train and sacrifice for the group anymore, their life has ceased to have value. That could be incredibly dangerous. We don't have to fall for either mistake. That dignity is a virtue, not a quality, or that virtue exists outside of practice. Our reason and our emotional intelligence are such incredible tools that we can detect and split these atoms with. Humanism has much more in common with a warrior religion than it does with any traditional religion. We can learn from the warrior religion that we have to have a life-giving relationship with effort and suffering in order to practice our values. I stress the life-giving part because we have something to teach the warrior ethos, because we affirm that human dignity is not conditional upon anything. And that includes how much one puts into contributing to the community through their suffering and effort. The significance of this flashpoint has only become more evident to me week by week since Anne first asked me to come to Brooklyn. We must act. Everybody stands at their own intersection of power and vulnerability, with their own tolerance for risk and their own tolerance for effort and discomfort. We don't have to fall victim to the pressure to act exactly as others act, when and where they act. We don't have to accept a premise either that our dignity as people depends on living up to other people's risk tolerance. After all, it's awfully easy to tolerate someone else's risk. At the same time, we recognize that we stand at our own intersection of power and vulnerability, and that we can cultivate our tolerance for risk and effort to do more if we invest in it. If we don't accept the warrior ethos's invitation to challenge our boundaries, we may find ourselves paralyzed when stakes are raised for us outside of our control. The solution I propose is to hold these two gently, that being a warrior is a human endeavor, that our community depends on us putting our backs into our values, long past the point of discomfort at times. But at the same time, our dignity and our value in the community is not dependent on whether or not we are one of the people capable of doing that. It's a challenge that we as humanists and ethical culturists and warriors are uniquely suited for. That we need no promise of an eternity free of suffering to elect to live uprightly during our brief lives, even when it is difficult. The warrior ethos offers us is that it is possible not just to live a life of intentional difficulty and challenge, but that there is joy and cheerfulness to be had, giving for the group even when it challenges us. Thank you so much for inviting me today. This talk has been a watershed conversation, uh, coming from so much philosophical work with the Humanist Institute and even work with Buddhism, which has an explicit relationship with suffering that, well, they're happy to tell you a lot about. Uh, but I note that the Buddha was a Kshatriya class, which is the warrior leader class of the community. And so Buddhism approaches very much the problem of suffering from a warrior ethos perspective.